One sentence in the beginning. We've heard a lot about the projects and the projects and the projects this morning. As a matter of fact, those of you who will be successful in the selection and evaluation process will more or less become members of this PREFORMA consortium, PREFORMA project. So I think it might be good for those who make it at the end of the day to get a bit more informed in what the CSA part of the PREFORMA project does, what our obligations are, what we get our money for. Because there is a close interaction, and when I come a bit later to progress reports, that's not only that we would like to have that, it's also an obligation that we have to fulfill in terms of the European Commission, because it's an EU project. But let me start and let's have a look. As you can see, this design phase work plan, I don't call it a work package because you are not so much involved in the structure, that's why I call it the work plan. It's a two-steps design approach for the reason that Antonella already explained this morning. We have a phase 1 and then we have a phase 2, and the prototype phase is running from the end of phase 1 towards phase 2 of the design and then goes further. And we as the work package leaders, we will of course support all the suppliers in meeting the requirements of the memory institutions. This is our aim and our goal. As we are not really a work package leader in that respect, we are more a supervisor, a monitoring partner, because it's you fulfilling, let's say, the aims and goals of the work package. It's you making this work package to come to life. It's not us in that respect. As you have already seen there as well, it runs from November 2014 to March 2016. It's the two phases, not throughout all this time, but we have two slots in that respect. We call that the co-design phase, or step number 1 and 2. You have already seen from Antonella's figures, it will not be hundreds of suppliers, let's say, winning at the end of the day. It's approximately 6. I just said 6 and 3 here. It's still, let's say, tentative, but it's like we set up the plan for. It could be more, it could be less. It depends on the quality of the offers, let's say, of the tenders. But this is what we are looking for at the moment. You already saw that as well, co-design phase number 1, co-design phase number 2 with the prototyping. And I just entered a few elements here in the different month, which is November, March, etc. I'll come to that later. What comes to us in terms of tasks? Because we have to have an evaluation strategy, we have to provide a design report, we have to compile the final report for the design phase. So this is more or less what the CSA part within this project does. And the upper part, you see, above the dotted line, is more or less what the suppliers need to do within the project. When it comes to the user-centered design, and we all talked about that right from the beginning, it needs to be a user-centered design. You see that you start to plan it somewhere at the upper left. You have to understand the context. I assume that all of the companies, all of the consortia that will send in application forms for the call for tender will be experienced in their respective domain and will of course be able to understand the requirements of the memory institutions and of the domain. Then of course we have to specify the organizational requirements, the user group the requirements. We already talked about the different stakeholders that we have. It's not just the memory institutions that are inside the project. It's a network of other memory institutions outside of the project as a kind of associated network. They will, of course, bring their requirements onto the table so that we can incorporate that. Then you produce your own design solutions, and then we evaluate that. And maybe if you're successful, you can go to a yes, so that we can say, okay, the system meets the requirements. Sometimes you have to go for another circle. And here we said, okay, we have these co-design phases 1 and 2 in order to allow you to incorporate the lessons learned from the first month in prototyping and do a kind of redesign afterwards. So this is more or less the reason why we have chosen this iterative design. And when we think about applications, we always have to think about data, because what we expect you to submit is not only an application, it is also an application that has been tested, that has been trained, and has been demonstrated on the basis of a lot of different data. And I just want to shortly introduce what we consider being important categories of data. This is still a bit under discussion as a lot in this project, because as Börje already said, and Antonella, this is something new even to us, to the Commission, to you, to all of us in that respect. What is test data? Just to make a long story short, test data means it is the data that we use to test your application. Training data is the data that you use to tune your application, to internally test your application. And demonstration data is the data that we provide to the open source community, to others, in order to prove that your system, your application is well working. Why do I say that? Because there will be hopefully a lot of tenderers, but only a handful will be selected as winners. But it does not prevent the others from proceeding, but just without the project money. And it does not prevent others that find the way to PREFORMA later, after the official call, after the tender, just to jump in and do some work in the respect. So what we have to do is providing them the demonstration data so that they can, let's say, verify or validate or evaluate their own application according to the demonstration data that we found out to be fruitful, yesful, valuable for, let's say, checking our own applications here. And just to translate that into the project language, the test data, let's say, will be provided by the memory institutions and by us, the research partners. And we may take some test data of what you have provided, you as the suppliers. So this is something that we select internally within the CSA part in order to properly and appropriately test all the different applications. Training data, that's what you need to provide. Under the open source agreement, the open source licenses, under the open source idea, we of course would like to have as many training data as possible from your side becoming demonstration data. On the other hand, it might be that you have a certain subset of training data that you would not like to make, let's say, public data, according to your IPR policy, company policy, security policy, or whatsoever. But what we like to see is as much training data becoming demonstration data, so that we have a lot of data that we can open to the public, that we can provide to the public, so that they can follow the progress of the project, either from the side of an interested visitor like other memory institutions, or from the side of an open source community company that would like to follow the steps and produce their own ideas, their own applications, their own modules, however you would like to do that. Coming back to the design of the design or co-design phase, as you have already seen, and I started explaining that in the beginning, it's two phases. The first one runs from November 14 to December 14, and we would like you to prepare functional specifications. So at the end of December 14, we would like you to send us, let's say, a certain subset that describes the intended behavior of the software. And then we have the second, the phase 1B, if you'd like to say so. It's January to February, where we would like to see you providing a high-level structure of the software so that we can use that and have a look at it, preferably by the end of February. It's a different component structure, it's the overall architecture, it's these things that will provide us with a basis for our own decision process. But it's not only this, this work that you provide, it's also a workshop that we have planned in the beginning of March, where all of the winning consortia, of the winning companies, will give a 60 minutes presentation plus a 20 minutes discussion internally, bilaterally, so the consortium and the company, not in front of the others. And this, of course, becomes a major part, a very important part for us as an input in the evaluation strategy. As I said here, the results serve as additional evaluation input apart from what you have provided us before in terms of progress reports. And after that, we will go for the internal round, as you have heard, with the evaluation committee, the evaluation team, and make a decision on the progress of the different tenderers, the different suppliers. The second phase, after you have learned a lot, hopefully in the prototype phase that starts in March 2015, will run from November 15 to February 16, so exactly 1 year ahead. And of course, it's the same structure as I explained for the first phase, but it's then, of course, much more mature what we expect you to do. It's again these progress reports. What have you done in the past? What have you done in the meantime? How did the solution evolve in terms of training data, in terms of demonstration data and these things. So we'd like to have then program specification, software architecture documentation, and it looks a bit like the same in compared to phase 1, and it is indeed, because we would like to compare the success that you have made in the first phase and the success that you have made in the second phase, and see what is the learning process. Not just for you, also for us and for the European Commission is it important to learn about the lessons learned and the progress stories. That's from my side. If there is a particular question to this presentation, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, we have the Q&A session. And I would then hand over to Nicola for the next step of the evaluation prototyping process.